Welcome to another Bible prophecy video with Pastor Tom Elseroad. Have your Bibles ready as we dig deeper into God's holy word.
All right, so we've been through 4 chapters of the book of Daniel, and so I think this is going to be kind of a fun one. A lot of these, 4 and 5, and probably 2, those chapters, are pretty familiar stories, and this is kind of a familiar story as well, but there's some background to it that makes it, I think, quite interesting. So where we are now, time-wise, is much later in time, like 66 years later, from chapter 1, where Daniel was first captured, like at a 15-year-old, and he and his companions and all that. So they're in 605 BC. What we just saw last week was the tree of the vision, the vision of the tree from Nebuchadnezzar about his pride in God. I think actually saw Nebuchadnezzar come to faith in chapter 4. But from the time that Daniel was there, he was 15. By the time you get to chapter 5, where we are today, he's 81. So there's a whole bunch of years that have gone by. And so let me just dive into... I also want to point at this, just for a moment, that the Judah, when in 605 BC, is when Daniel was taken, right? Daniel was taken, his companions, and a lot of the leaders, anybody official in that regard, any kind of nobility or royalty, especially from the tribe of Judah, they definitely were taken. And so as the time went on, there were several waves of Babylon that came in and took more people, and more people, more people. In 598, under Jehoiakim, 3,000 more people were taken. Jeremiah 22 or 52 talks about that. And a little bit later, there was 10,000 more people that were taken. So you see there's a wave where they were coming in. Babylon would come back, take some people, and leave. And then they would come back later, take some people, leave. A little bit later, 382. And then there was what they called the defectors. They were just bad who was left, anything that was left. And the last time, in 582, they took 745 more people. The point is, it wasn't just one event in 605 BC. There were actually more waves. Now, all this time, Daniel and his friends have been in Babylon, while there were more people taken from Jerusalem and Judea and brought to Babylon. Just understand that there was a lot of waves to it. So in Daniel 5, I pointed this out, that 605 BC is when Nebuchadnezzar became king, and that's also the year that they, took Daniel and those guys to Babylon. And so that's 605 BC. Now, Nebuchadnezzar has been the ruler. He'll rule for 43 years, right? So, but the last 2 years, because he died, he was a believer. We believe the last 2 years of his time. So what we saw last week, where the pride vision of the tree and all that, and then he comes to recognize the Lord. He really appears to actually have been a believer. And that becomes important for our chapter 5 that we're talking about today, that this influence that Nebuchadnezzar had on Belshazzar, which is the king at the time, in chapter 5. So in Babylon, you got Nebuchadnezzar dies, and then you have a king that lasted 2 years, a king that lasted 4 years, a king that lasted 1 year, right? You get the idea. They didn't last very long like they did with Nebuchadnezzar for 43 years. And then you get down to where we are here. So from chapter 4, when about the time that Nebuchadnezzar gets saved, till chapter 5, it's 25 years that passed. Again, like I said, he was 81 or so when you get to chapter 5. Daniel was. So he's an old man. In the early part of the books, when he's giving the interpretation in chapter 2, he's a young guy talking to an old king, and now he's an old guy speaking to a young king, is what's happening here in Daniel chapter 5. So this kind of put in perspective. He's much older, and as we come into chapter 5 itself, a couple notes here. Nabonidus was the actual king, and Daniel's probably the most picked on book in the Bible. Did you know that? Daniel is picked on like you can't imagine, and the reason is it's got truths in there and things that it predicts hundreds of years later, and some thousands of years later. And so the hundreds of years later thing, people go, well, he couldn't have possibly known that. Like even in chapter 2. with the image of the Babylon and Media Persia and Greece and then Rome. He predicts their coming and what characteristics there are about that nation. But so in history, Nabonidus, the king at the time, is well known in history. They all know about him. There's lots of writings about him and all that. But it says when you get to chapter 5, verse 1, it talks about Belshazzar being the king. And you're like, well, wait a minute now. Is the Bible wrong? Of course not. I'd always interpret the secular history by the Bible. I would always put it in that order. The Bible is always correct. See, Belshazzar is actually the son of Nabonidus. And they were co-kings, co-regents. And what was going on, Nabonidus was really the guy who was trying to keep the kingdom alive, because the context of chapter 5 is the Medes and the Persians are growing into power and influence, and they're taking areas and cities and taking over trade routes. And so Nabonidus is trying to fix those. So some of it means he's doing some battle. Some of it means he's doing some negotiations and things. He's trying to make things continue to work. Kind of feels like our country right about now, to be honest. But without going into anything political, sounds like we're trying to do all the wrong things anyway that can't make it work. So Nebuchadnezzar, by the way, was actually the grandfather of Belshazzar. And Belshazzar is going to be called the king of Babylon when we get to verse 1. But the bottom line is they got two rulers going on. The Nebuchadnezzar, or I should say Belshazzar, is staying in Babylon proper. And then his father is out trying to make things right, trying to keep it all together. And so during this time, which is a really interesting time in history, what was going on around Babylon was a siege. The Medes in particular, the Persians come in a little bit later, but the Medes and the Persians work together, and the Medes are the one who are sieging the city, meaning they're surrounding it. Nobody can come in, nobody can go out. So during this feast, in verse 1, it talks about this feast. During this feast, Belshazzar, who's the co-king, the younger son of Babylon, the Median general Gorgias was besieging the city. And so when I say, who in their right mind would throw a party, which is what verse 1 is going to say, you can see they're going to throw a big party while they know their city is surrounded. And they know their city is surrounded. Who would do that? Well, anyone that thinks that they're going to be able to withstand the siege. They think that they got everything they need. They got inside the big walls. Everything's happy and hunky-dory. Nothing can happen to us. We're going to throw a party. I mean, what we saw that we're in here and we got a bunch of people around us wanting to kill us, would we want to have a party? Well, typically no. Most people in the right mind be like, how do we get out of this situation? Well, that's not how he's doing it. He's going to throw what appears to be a party. So a couple of things here, just from some historical things. Some of the Greek historians said that they talks about this siege. The scripture doesn't say, right in chapter 5 here, how the Medes and Persians take over Babylon. It just happens, right? It's just the way it happened. It doesn't give us any details. But the historians, they talked about the besieging the city. And then underneath the wall, this is what they did. Remember the big picture of Babylon, and you got this big wall, and in the middle of it, you got the Euphrates running right through it. All that water, and they had a great abundance. It was a good thing. Well, that also can be a vulnerability, and that became the vulnerability. So underneath the wall of the city, they had this canal that they had driven. So you got the water coming from here and going down. And so what they did in going through the city, they made a channel and washed it and put it right back into the Euphrates. So they diverted the water, so it's no longer going into the city. It's now going through this new little channel and continuing on down the Euphrates. So what they did by eliminating the water from going in there, now it's lowering and lowering, and so they were actually able to get underneath the city and bring the army in, basically. So, and they talked about this cylinder. It talks about the fact that it was a battle without a battle, and they were taking over Babylon. As great as it was taken over without there actually being a battle. They just kind of came in and took over, and they went, "Whoa, where they come from?" Well, okay, they gave up. And so, anyway, so there's historical writings that talk about this, and it's only those historical writings that tell us how they got in underneath, and because of that diverting the water that was going into the city. Okay. Verse 1. Belshazzar, now again, he's the son, right? And his father's kind of really the real king. All the historians would talk as the king. Belshazzar is the king in Babylon proper, where again his father is out and about trying to fix all these problems because the Persians are growing and they're beating everybody around them, and they know eventually they're coming after them. And eventually they did. Of course, like you said, they surrounded them. They were coming after Babylon. You have to have quite an army to realize that, to go, okay, we're going to take that city that's 60 miles around a wall. Yeah, we can take that. You've got to have quite an army to think that you can do something like that. Quite a deal. So that's the Belshazzar, the son, who's also called the king. So Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine in the presence of his 1,000, all these people, which is kind of an unusual thing in a sense, because most of the time the kings didn't go into a drunken brawl, didn't go into drunkenness in front of all the people. They did it privately, typically. They would do it at home. They go with all the luxuries and all that. They would indulge themselves in the gratifications, all the foods and stuff. They would do that to themselves. They didn't flaunt it. They would do it with special people. But here they did it for 1,000 people, and he wasn't afraid to just go all out, and he was, so it became a really wild party. Here's the king himself is losing control. They didn't like to do that, because when you drink, you do stupid stuff, right? You tend to be very foolish in the way you act. So he's really acting. He's an acting king. He's in Babylon proper, and he's acting like a king. And he has this major feast going on with 1,000 lords, important people. Again, don't forget. But around the city, they're actually surrounded, and at the very time that's going on. So I like the way it starts out in verse 2. While he tasted the wine, he's emphasizing this wine and drinking it in the context with all these people around. While he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his grandfather. In Hebrew, the word for generations and descendants are really difficult. Somebody's called a father, like Jesus could call David his father, even though there's hundreds of years between them. He is a descendant of. So when he talks about this word father, he's going to be using it multiple times. He's actually referring to his grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, 2 generations up. We use that term father, great-grandfather, great-great, so we kind of know how many generations. They didn't do that in Hebrew, which is really fun when you go through genealogies. Pretty interesting sometimes. Wait a minute, how many generations? So you're putting it on a calendar and you look at how many years had passed and all that. So he told them, what does Nebuchadnezzar tell him to do? Get the gold and the silver. He's commanding them that his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, right? So he'd taken all these wonderful things, these valuables he'd taken from Jerusalem, brought it back to Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar seemed to have respect for them. He kept them in reserve and didn't touch him, basically, is what he was doing. So he had an influence on his grandson. It seems like his grandson is really rebelling against his grandfather, and I think you'll see it as we go on a little bit more and more. So he takes the vessels, these gold and silver cups and all that stuff, and that were in Jerusalem, that the king and his lords and his wives and his concubines all might drink from them. Look at it, it's sacrilegious, right? That what they're doing is taking these things that are holy unto the Lord and saying, we're going to use them for a vain purpose, right? And that's what they did. So they went out and got them. So again, he keeps emphasizing the intoxication, because the more you drink, the dumber you act. So the gold and silver vessels were the ones, again, that were in Jerusalem. And I think he's actually trying to attempt to undo the influence that Nebuchadnezzar had. Because in the end, the last 2 years of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, he was actually very positive towards the Lord, because the Lord put him through 7 years humbling, until he came to realize that the God of David, rather Daniel, is really the God, the holy God himself. So it seems to me that Belshazzar is doing what he can to be rebellious, and because he can, right? It seems to be the attitude. So Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords and his wives and his concubines drank from them. So they're going on, they're having this wonderful little party, and they're using the things that were taken from the temple in Jerusalem. So while they're doing this, right, then they brought the gold vessels. Actually, the next verse is really interesting. So they drank wine, and they praised the gods of gold. Right, they're using God's vessels that are supposed to be in the temple. They drank wine. How many times did he say? Well, in verse 4 and 3 times he emphasized they're drinking wine. Right, they drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver and bronze and iron and wood and stone. All these idols, and they had thousands of different idols. They had lots of idols that they worshiped. They were very much polygamous in that regard, polytheists. So the occasion started out as a royal banquet. It ended up like a drunken worship of dumb idols. I mean, dumb idols, because when you're worshiping objects that man makes, you're not really worshiping anything. It has no intelligence. So they toasted to those gods. I think if they were to try to name all their gods, they couldn't get them all out. There's so many of them. They were to try to say, well, worship this god and that god. They can name all the main ones, but there's so many that people worship that there's no way they could have actually celebrated or toasted all of them. In the same hour, while all that's going on and they're just worshiping all their gods and praising how great they are, in the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. So it had a light that would shine so it can be very visible to everybody, right? And the king saw part of the hand that rose, like you can see part of the hand, and it's writing on the wall. And they're like, whoa. So, you ever talk to somebody who's they go out drinking, and then you get pulled over by a cop? Do you tend to sober up real fast? You act like it. You may not be able to, but you act like everything's okay. He was now scared because what he just saw, a hand, what appears to be suspended in the air, writing on the wall, would pretty much make all of us go, whoa. And that obviously made him fearful in a very big way. So while he's using God's vessels, I think he's challenging God. Is what he's doing. He's challenging God because in their mind, when you conquer a nation and you steal their stuff, you take all of the loot, the plunder, and you take it back with them. What you've done in your own mind is you've just said that your God is better than their God. Because why? Because I just beat them up. They don't realize the reason they're being beat up is because God's judging Israel for their waywardness and their faithlessness and their rebellion and all that goes with it. So many see a couple of concepts here. So many see the writing on the wall as being the one who, Jesus, of course, is the one who scribbled in the sand. Remember that the picture is the idea that as Jesus was writing their names and all the guys were leaving, they all like he's writing somebody's name and you had an affair with that person. Oh, I'm leaving. So you feel guilt. They all left. To that woman, sinful woman, it was a message of what? Forgiveness, right? Go and sin no more, he ends up telling them. Where's your accusers? Well, none. They're all gone. But here, this is a message of doom for the king. There's no more grace. You've gone past that. You're not getting a second chance. You've already gone over the line according to God. So God doesn't speak by dream or vision because he's not giving them another chance. He's not trying to reach them, other than to give them the message, your time is up, right? The doom is very sure. Verse 6, then the king's countenance changed. Again, he's just can't believe it. He's fearful. And his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked together. The idea is he collapses. His legs give way and he collapses. I mean, would you like my little... so the festivities gave way to a hushed fear, right? Everything was looking great until this image of somebody writing on the wall shows up. And so they all now they're fearful for everything. His countenance changed. He probably looks pale. He just can't believe what's happening. But he doesn't know what it means. He just knows it can't be good at this point. Verse 7, then the king cried out aloud, to bring in the astrologers. We've seen this a few times. To bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers. The king spoke, saying to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and he shall be third ruler in the kingdom. Why third? Because his father's number one, Belshazzar's number two. He can't make him any greater than that, so he'll be the one right under Belshazzar in authority. But if he knows what's going to happen, that doesn't mean anything because they're about to lose their kingdom. So whatever this third ruler would be means nothing when it comes down to it. So obviously he's asking them to read it. What does the word say? And then what is the meaning? And again, just like in the other visions that Daniel was able to read, it was all of God. The whole thing was of God. So he made sure nobody else would have any idea, any clue what was going on. So verse 8, now all the king's wise men and horsemen, Humpty Dumpty, couldn't put them back together again. I don't know why I want to do that. Now all the king's wise men came, but they could not read the writing. They didn't know the language. They didn't know what the words were, or make known to the king its interpretation. So again, this is a supernatural thing between God and Daniel, and he's trying to get a message to Belshazzar. There's nothing you can do. You got a problem, is what he's going to end up telling him. So I sitting there thinking about this. This is kind of the third strike for these guys. They all show up in chapter 2, and they couldn't understand the image. They had no way of doing it. In chapter 3, there was the vision of the tree, right, which ended up being, it was all about Nebuchadnezzar and how his pride and God's going to destroy him, that he's the picture of the tree. And now right here, it's kind of that third strike. If you have 3 strikes and you're out, they'd be in bad trouble because they seem to fail a lot. In each one of these cases, somebody else came along and was the hero of the day. Of course, that ended up being Daniel, right? Daniel wasn't present at this time. We'll see they're going to eventually call him specifically because nobody else has any idea how to interpret it. Then King Belshazzar was greatly troubled. His countenance was changed, and his lords were astonished. So all this is happening in front of them. And so I think the picture is the idea that he's looking really bad. He's screwing. He's supposed to be the king. He's supposed to be the one in charge. He's the one that's got everything under control, and he's not that. They're looking at him like, oh, he's fearing. Maybe we should be fearing too. They're just astonished that he just seems to be losing control, and he's supposed to be the one in charge, right? Again, the fact that they couldn't read it, obviously they were not able to give the interpretation. So, still describing what's going on for them. So this is interesting too, verse 10. The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. Now the queen here isn't his wife. This is what happens when you have polygamy. You end up with multiple wives, and because you marry this one and that. And so this queen is actually the wife of Nebuchadnezzar, right? Belshazzar's grandfather. So she would be older, much older, but she's alive. Nebuchadnezzar has died, but she's still alive. She's actually the queen that he's referring to. So she says, because of the words of the king and his lords, she came to the banquet hall. She's getting a vision of what's happening. He's losing control, right? So the queen spoke, saying, "O king, live forever." Even when it's your grandson, you say that in front of everybody, right? "Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change." So she's actually trying to comfort him in his situation. So again, the queen's not his wife. It's actually his grandmother, the wife of Nebuchadnezzar. Because you end up with all these different women, and if they still live, they've been considered queen for a long time, and she has a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge, and she's able to share that. And right now, she's going to be the one who, in fact, she's going to talk about the life of Nebuchadnezzar. Her husband is going to come up in the picture here. So that's an important concept. There's a man, now she's talking to her grandson, trying to say, there's somebody else you should know about. There's a man in your kingdom in whom is the Spirit of the Holy God. We see that phrase used all the time, especially in the context with Gentiles referring to God. He's the Holy God. And in the days of your father, again, actually grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, right? Like they would understand all these gods because they've been just toasting all their gods and praising all these gods. He's got wisdom like those gods, but he's even better than all of them. So it says, like the wisdom of the gods were found in him, this talking about Daniel. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your grandfather, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. Made him to be in charge of the whole thing, that whole group. And so they were. So he was. But he's not there, so she's making reference to him, and they're going to have to summon him because he's not there in the king's, in Babylon at the time. I don't know what that means or whether he's in another part because there was a siege going on. If he was out of the city, I would think they wouldn't let him in. So he must have been somewhere else in the city, far away from the palace itself, because I don't know how he would have got in with the siege going on around the city itself. So I put it like this: the queen appears to be saving face for the king. He's making a fool of himself, and he's scaring everybody because he's not in charge like he should be. He's not in control like he should be. He's losing control. So she points out that the point that she's making is superior wisdom in this man Daniel. So we need to bring him on. So better. That's why Nebuchadnezzar gave him such the rank that he had. You're calling his underlords, if you will, but you really need to go to Daniel himself because he's the one that will be able to do, because she seems to have a lot of confidence in him, just like Nebuchadnezzar learned to have confidence in Daniel. Inasmuch as an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas were found in this Daniel, meaning he can fix things, right? He can make make sense out of it all. Whom the king named Belshazzar. So his name is Daniel, but the king gave him a Babylonian name. Again, that's Belshazzar. Let Daniel be called, which is interesting. So she knows his Hebrew name. She references Belshazzar, the Babylonian name, but when she calls it, she said, let Daniel be called. Right? And of course he was. And he will give the interpretation. That's a lot of confidence in somebody. But he's already proven himself twice, right? Chapter 2 and chapter 4. Well, the word enigmas is kind of interesting. It's the idea, it's a hard knot, and he knows how to untie these hard knots. You all have had linen and string, and it got in how many hours you can spend unraveling the string. Well, he knows how to untie it, or maybe a Rubik's Cube, how people go, whoa. He just made that down in 4 seconds, and we're like here hours later. How does that work again? You know? So the point is, Daniel was able to make it work, and so that was a really good thing. So the queen mother has come to help her grandson because he's in trouble, and he's making himself look like a fool. It won't matter before the night's over, right? Then Daniel was brought in before the king. Again, so he finally got him. He's brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, are you that Daniel, who is the one of the captives from Judah, whom my grandfather, the king brought from Judah? He's just making sure, are you that one? He's heard of him, but he's never met him. So he doesn't know him personally, but he's heard of him, is obviously the point. He just wants to verify that he is who everyone says that he is, and because he's heard about him, his reputation did precede him in Daniel's case. I have heard of you, that the Spirit of God is in you, and I don't know what that means to him. The Spirit of God, it could be any God, whatever famous God he wants, in his world. But the Spirit of God is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Talking to Daniel in a very wonderful way. Daniel, his faith in this chapter is pretty incredible. So obviously Daniel's reputation preceded him. I know of you, but I've never met you. I just want to make sure you are who I heard, right? Now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, and he's given an account. I brought all these guys that their whole purpose is to tell me the interpretation of things like this and difficult puzzles and riddles and things. They're supposed to do that, and they're not helping me too much, is what he's saying. They have been brought before me that they should read this writing and make known to me its interpretation. but they could not give the interpretation of the thing. They can't even read the words, let alone what does it mean. So Daniel is informed of their failure, is the obviously the short answer there. 16, and I have heard of you, again, the second time he said, I have heard of you, right? That you can give interpretations and explain enigmas, again, those difficult knots, unravel them for them. Now, if you can read the writing, number one, and two, and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck and shall be third ruler in the kingdom. Okay, the same thing he told them, he's now giving that opportunity to Daniel. So, if Daniel can read the writing and make known the interpretation, he'll receive all these wonderful rewards. 17, then Daniel answered and said before the king, let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another. He's like, I'm going to do what you need. I'm going to answer the question, but in the meanwhile, I don't care about your gifts. It means nothing to me. Especially if he has any insight that they're about to lose the kingdom, that he's about to make him third ruler for what, an hour or so? Then he's no longer in. So, I mean, you see the point that they're going to lose it very soon, right? Let your gifts be for yourself, to yourself, and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. I will do that, but in the meanwhile, I don't care about any kind of rewards, right? So he didn't have any regard for it. And again, it was only going to be for a few hours. You're going to be third in the kingdom of Babylon. Well, okay, that's over with. Because it's only going to last a little bit of time here. So again, in this case, Daniel's the young man. Remember when he was talking to Nebuchadnezzar, he was the young guy speaking to the older king. Now it's reversed. Now you got a young king, and he's the older guy in the context here. He's like 81 in chapter 5 here. O King, the Most High God, gave Nebuchadnezzar, your grandfather, a kingdom and majesty, glory, and honor. What is he saying there? He's saying the real God, the only true God, is the one who's given Nebuchadnezzar the power that he had, right? He's the only one that gave him that power. So the source of being a king and being in charge is God, is obviously the point. So he's given him this background before he gives the interpretation, because he's given him the background that matters in his situation. Just like Nebuchadnezzar was made a king because of God, you were too, and he could take, as he's going to talk about Nebuchadnezzar a little bit more, but as he took the kingdom away from Nebuchadnezzar and then he came back, he's going to take it away from you, is obviously the point he's getting to, is the background is you're messing up worse than Nebuchadnezzar did. So notice that Daniel says God gave that Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. So if he gave it to Nebuchadnezzar, he's also the one that gave it to you. And you were the one that went into there and told everyone to get the temples, cups, and all this stuff and abuse them in front of all these lords. And so he's really got a showdown between him and God. And because of the majesty that he gave him, God gave Nebuchadnezzar great majesty. All peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Whoever he wished, he kept alive. I mean, it was he was dictator, ultimate dictator. Whomever he wished, he set up. And whoever he wished, he cut down and set down. He would put him down. So he gave him all this authority, right? So you understood that God's the one that gave it to him, but he didn't. That doesn't mean that God approved of everything that Nebuchadnezzar did, because he probably abused it and abused some people in a bad way along the way. Doesn't mean that God's saying, I approve of anything he does because I made him king. No, he can mess up, and he did mess up. But the point he's saying is God's ultimately the one who put him there in that position in the first place. Belshazzar is supposed to get that too, right? He's supposed to realize that he is in that position because God put him there. But when his heart was lifted up, now he's going to go back to talk about chapter 4 we just read last week. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. So for 7 years, he was not the king. He was actually considered the king, but he wasn't in his right mind. He acted like an animal, and he went around eating hay and eating grass and all that stuff. So the pride of the king over his greatness was displeasing to God, that he temporarily took away the kingdom, which is what happened in chapter 4. He was so proud, He said he'll be in this position until he learns that the Most High God is God. So he does learn that, and so he gets his kingdom back for about 2 years. So he's making known all these things. Daniel saw it. He knew all about it. So and Belshazzar knows all about it too. But he's being reminded so he can connect dots, because those dots that need to be connected in his mind. Meaning he needs to understand. Then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beasts. Again, that's chapter 4. And his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like an oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, because he stayed outside. He wasn't dwelling in a building or a house. Till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of man. He's making it very plain to him. It's like we're reading chapter 4 over again. He's making that point. The reason this is happening to you is until you learn that the Most High is the one who rules the kingdom of men, and that God has put you in that position. So God appoints, and he points over it whoever he chooses, God chooses. And so that's what's going on there. So Daniel, again, repeats what happened in chapter 4 there. He's just repeating a story that he already knows, Belshazzar knows, but he needs to realize he's referring to him specifically. But you, his grandson, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. He's saying you already knew all this stuff already. It's not like a new thing, and where your grandfather learned from it, you haven't. You haven't learned from it. Daniel knew that he knew all about that experience with Nebuchadnezzar, but it's one of those things kind of like, we don't want to talk about that kind of thing, right? So if you ignore it, maybe it goes away, because what happened with Nebuchadnezzar could happen to him, and he doesn't want that idea to even enter his mind. Verse 23, and you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. Right? Listen, he's going to be Daniel wasn't here to see this, but he's obviously been taught this. They have brought the vessels of the house before you, right? The things that they took from the temple that Belshazzar told them to go get and bring them in, and we're going to drink our wine from it and all that. So they have brought the vessels of the house before you, and you and your lords and your wives and your concubines have drunk wine from them. All he can do is go, you're right, Daniel, that is exactly what happened. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold and bronze and iron and wood and stone, which do not see nor hear or know. You're telling this to the king of Babylon, who believes in all these idols, and he's saying, you're an idiot. He didn't use those words, but you're an idiot because you're believing and worshiping things that are lower than you, and you're acting like they're higher than you. It's foolishness. And the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you have not glorified. There's only one real God, and he's not the one you've been glorifying. He's the one you've been trying to denigrate and go by taking all the vessels and abusing them the way that you did. So I see this as rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar and his father. He knew about his grandfather and all that. He became very pro Jehovah, very pro the Lord. And so he's like, I don't want that. I'm going to do something the opposite. I'm going to use those vessels and I'm going to abuse them for my own little party. So, 24. Then the fingers of the hand were sent from him. So he's walking him through, and everything. All he could do is go, yeah, that is what happened. I'm sure he's itching to go, well, tell me the meaning. You're telling me all this stuff. I don't want to learn from it. I just want to know the meaning. I don't want to learn the history that you're preaching at me. I can only imagine. Then the fingers of the hand were sent from him, from that great God, and his writing was written. So he's getting close to giving them the meaning. So the hand, in this case, is a message of doom, a message of judgment is about to take place. And this is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. And I could put it in Hebrew. I can put the words up there, but I don't think it would mean anything. As it is in your Bible, it's a transliteration, which looks like this, right? Mene means numbered, and he actually repeats it. Numbered, tekel, to balance, upharsin, to split up. So numbered, to balance, to split up. Is he going to be real literal? But he got to be, that has to mean a little bit more than that. So he pronounces the letters, the words to him, before he gives them what the whole thing means. This is the interpretation of each word. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Oh, that doesn't sound good if you're Belshazzar. And finished it. How can that be? And so he's being very plain. Your kingdom is about to come to an end. Numbered, of course, is the idea of weighing. He uses the picture of a scale. And when everything's balanced, the scale's even. But he's saying it's not balanced. It's not equal like it's supposed to. So he uses, in fact, this chapter has a lot of little phrases that we use in our own little language today, and we'll see that as we go on. It's the language that people use today, and they don't think about this story at all. It has it's taken on its own little world. So God has numbered the days of the Babylonian kingdom. He determines beforehand the length of our days, and we can't change that. There's a message somewhere in there, don't you think? We're only going to live as long as God intends us to live, and we're not going to die before we're supposed to die. That was hard for us to get a hold of, because sometimes we think, we fear and we think we make a mistake or whatever. But the point is, God's in control, and He has our days numbered in a positive way. He has His days numbered in a negative way. He determines beforehand, and that's something we can't change, right? Something we should learn for ourselves. Tikal. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting, meaning there's not enough. It's not enough. You're like, whoop, you're the one up here. This is what you're supposed to be, so it's supposed to be even. But the good things, the characteristics you're supposed to be, are way outweighing your characteristics because you don't have enough weight, is the point is. You've been found wanting. There's not enough character in you worth saving, is the picture. Not a very good picture if you're Belshazzar. This is the meaning God has given him. So Belshazzar was weighed in the balances of God's character requirements, but was found wanting, not enough. He was unable to hold the beam level. He didn't have enough character there. So the people of Babylon, and him as a king in particular, didn't have enough character to weigh it up, to balance it like it's supposed to be. It's just a pictorial way of saying you're falling very short of what God requires of you. Even though he doesn't know the God, there's a certain sense where we all know when we do something bad, because there is something inside of us called a conscience, and even unbelievers have this conscience, right? And when they do bad things, they do evil things, something inside them should prick their spirit that they've done an evil thing. So Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Oh, wait a minute now. The Medes are the ones outside of the gate right now. Oh, this is not a good thing. So you're saying... And I like the word because the word Perez means divided. So your kingdom has been divided and given to a divided kingdom, the Medes and the Persians. It's almost like a pun in there, I think, the way he's saying it. It's been divided into two different kingdoms, which are actually enemies of yours, right? So I think it's kind of a mock there. 29. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and he clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck. I mean, I don't know why my vision here, when I've seen this chain of gold around the neck, seems to be rappers. I don't know why. Because every rapper has these big chains and big... Do they not? Is that now you're going to have that picture in your mind. So anyway, Daniel's not a rapper. Okay. So he clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. Okay. And Daniel, I think, has some perception, though that doesn't mean a whole lot. He's already been in that position, by the way, from Nebuchadnezzar. So he offers him this position, and again, Belshazzar was number 2 because his father was number 1, and that the third would have been, of course, Daniel is the idea of what he's given him, but he doesn't realize he's not really giving him anything. So in chapter 2, we saw the golden head. The head of gold is moving from the head down to the arms of silver, right? So that's what's happening here. It's already said it's going to happen in chapter 2. It's actually taking place here in chapter 5. So that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, right? So any promise he would have made to anybody wouldn't have gone very far, wouldn't have meant very much at all, I think that's, yeah. Then Darius the Mede, now he's the Mede. Now remember, you got the Medes and the Persians, but eventually the Persians become predominant. that becomes important when you get to chapter 7, because it's going to talk about them again, how there's a bear, he's going to roll up on one side, he's going to be referring to the Persians, how they're greater than the Medes. But for a while, they worked together and were able to accomplish enough to take the Babylonians. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So he's 62 years old, and he takes over Babylon. That doesn't stay forever. You're going to see Darius for a little bit, and then you're going to see Cyrus come into, which is a Persian. The Persians become more dominant as time goes on. So Isaiah 21 prophesied this fall of Babylon. There's lots of places that refer to the fall of Babylon way before it happened. And Isaiah was certainly written before it took place. So it's a dual monarchy, and that's how it ended up there. So anyway, the bottom line is the words were written up on the screen, on the wall, and he sees it and he's fearing. It doesn't matter what he's going to do. God's already determined his time is up. Belshazzar is going to go down. And not only him, he gets slain that night, but the kingdom is taken over without a battle, as the historians talk about. Again, the scripture doesn't say how it happened. They just said, look, here's Darius the Mede. He's now in charge. It's kind of like, and the cylinder was the one that said that they lost a battle without a battle. They were taken over without even a battle. So we learn from history how it happened. Scripture just says this is what happened, and you got I don't know how to fill in the details. At least history gave us a little bit of detail how they routed the water around and how they were able to get inside the city without a big battle. Because a battle going up against that wall, you wouldn't go very far at all, because that's a big wall. The Babylonian wall was so high, there's no way they were going to breach it. So, anybody have any thoughts, comments, or questions? Good. All right. Father, thank you for this awesome day again, and we just thank you for this time together, and we just pray that you bless this time, and everyone as they leave from here, that you give them safe travel, and just use the principles that you're in charge, and we want to give the acknowledgement that you're in charge, Father. Help us to be like Daniel, to stand up to tyrant kings and just tell the truth. And we want your name to be blessed and honored through it. In Jesus' name, amen.